So I'm going to show you how I would kind of break down these sections of the text in order to look at the cause and effect relationships and kind of understand them myself in order to answer some of the questions. So below this video that you should be watching now, there is this text that is on my screen right here. This is how I am going to kind of show you this section. You can follow along after the video too. But let's say I'm reading the section here, Slavery and the Constitution. And my question would be this one on the board right here that I wrote down. What was the source or start of the disagreements about slavery that would lead to the Civil War? So yeah, we looked at it yesterday, or the previous lesson, but how did these problems kind of lead to these major disagreements? And why was not everyone kind of on the same side or agreement about this? So first I look at the title and see slavery and the Constitution. So I kind of know that this is what the section is going to be about, is slavery and the Constitution. And then first I read the text. So I'm going to do this out loud, kind of here with you. When the U.S. Constitution was written in 1787, the interests of slaveholders and those who profited from slavery could not be ignored. So I'm already being like, oh, yeah, well, they were a major part of this. We saw that it kind of created the wealth and economy of the country. And so it's a central part of the Constitution. Sorry, on the second sentence, when I cursor here, although slaves could not vote, white Southerners argued slave labor contributed greatly to the nation's wealth. The Constitution, therefore, provided for counting each slave as 3/5 of a person in the census for the purpose of representation in Congress and the Electoral College. The clause gave the South a role in the national government far greater than the representation, based on its free population alone, would have allowed. So I kind of see from this first paragraph, oh, well, the slave holding interests of society were incredibly strong. They said that they thought that the nation's economy depended on slavery, which they were pretty correct in that. And also, they wanted power, as we mentioned earlier. They wanted representation. And so the only time they counted slaves was for representation for votes. Second paragraph. Although the Constitution did not use the term slavery, Article 4 provided for the return of escaping persons held to service or labor, such as fugitive slaves. Article 1 provided that the slave trade would end 20 years after the Constitution was ratified, which was in 1808. Third paragraph. The Constitution left many questions about slavery unanswered. In particular, the question of slavery status in any new territory acquired by the U.S. The failure to deal forthrightly and comprehensively with slavery in the Constitution guaranteed future conflict over the issue and was ultimately one of the primary catalysts or kind of like focal points that started or created the war. And then we've got two quotes down here from some historical figures. James McPherson, our historian, the war began because a compromise did not exist that would solve the difference between the free and the slave states regarding the power of the national government to prohibit slavery in the territories that had not become states. And then the last one by Dwight Pickately. The issue is not the existence of slavery, but the extension of it. So getting back to our question here of what was the source or start of the disagreements about slavery that lead to the Civil War? When I'm rereading or reviewing the text, because that's what you do after you read it the second time, is kind of this third paragraph in these quotes really kind of helps stand out. Like, okay, these first two are kind of context, but this third one really gets to, if I were to pick a quote here, the Constitution left many questions about slavery unanswered, in particular the question of slavery status in new territory acquired by the U.S. The failure to deal forthrightly and comprehensively with slavery guaranteed future conflicts. So because they kind of put this issue off and they're like, let's deal with it later, it kind of left room for these disagreements. And the expansion of slavery, as in like with the growth of the United States, would this be a free area or a slave area where it's allowed or where it's not? There wasn't answered or solved. And that really is what's going to divide the country even more, is that this unanswered question is going to continue to be more unanswered. And that's what you're going to see in your readings here today. So if I were to answer that question, I would really use a quote from either these two historians down here or this last paragraph about the expansion. So as you read on your own, kind of use these skills looking at cause and effect. Well, this is what happened. This is what the effect of it was and what happened because of that. And reread as you will, because you probably have to read more than once. But answer the questions. There are 10 of them, and then an independent practice longer writing at the end. Of course, remember to ask me any questions as we go or send it up by my office hours, but make sure you're reading through and then watch the last video at the end as kind of a closeout.